The Yellow Tooth Adventure. Chapter 6.
Outside the Gavergan wormhole, the three ships floated outside the event horizon, and they told their adventures from the time they first entered the wormhole. After David told about the Constitution's rescues, the Admiral asked about the flying ship taken to the Commodore. If 7 ships had been destroyed and 1 escaped, what happened to the last ship? David and Larry had to admit that they had not thought about that. It was decided that the 3 ships would drive through the wormhole and investigate this question. The Admiral was livid when he was told about the escape of the Commodore.
I will investigate Commodore Bluetail's actions and take appropriate action. I will also investigate the attacker's civilization and take appropriate action.
After a discussion with Admiral Marovich, it was decided that the Constitution and the Bradley would accompany Admiral Yellowtooth because of our treaty with the Flying, Justice, and Mutual Security. The Admiral asked David and Larry to stay with him.
United, the 3 of us would be a formidable force.
David answered, I believe that's what Admiral Marovich wanted. The first thing was to run down Commodore Bluetail. Larry asked,
Is Bluetail a coward?
The Admiral replied,
I have served with Bluetail for 20 years, and he is no coward. He is a dedicated officer and has put his life on the line more times than I can count. No, there's something else, perhaps a mutiny, although his crew has been with him since he made captain, about 6 years.
Tasha asked.
Where do we start?
The Admiral replied,
Let's start by going to my home world, Flyzinga, and start our investigation there.
The Constitution, Bradley, and the Confederation achieved UL-10, and the Admiral told them it would take 10 days to make the journey. Upon arrival at Flyzinga, the Admiral asked the local ruling parties to allow the United System Federation ship's crew shore leave, which was granted. The captain's instructions were simple: always in dress uniform, no less than 3 to a party or 5 to a party, stay in well-lit areas, stay sober, and don't annoy the native population. The crew was eager to explore the planet and learn more about the Flying culture. They boarded a shuttle and headed to the nearest city, where they were greeted by a friendly guide who offered for a small price to show them around. The guide explained that Flyzinga was a peaceful and prosperous world, with a rich history and diverse traditions. He took them to see some of the landmarks, such as the Great Pyramid, the Museum of Art and Science, and the Temple of Harmony. The crew was impressed by the beauty and sophistication of the Flying civilization. Meanwhile, the Admiral, captains, and first officers sought to find out what happened to Commodore Bluetail. The Flying Navy had not heard from the Commodore nor any other personnel or ship from the Admiral's fleet. So the Admiral hired 2 Flying men to ask around about hiding places, like Hole in the Wall, Wyoming. The 2 detectives had been, what we might call, police detectives before they retired. The detectives brought the Admiral a list of holes in the wall. The Admiral and captains were determined to investigate these places, one by one, until the Commodore was found or the list was exhausted. The list included scattered moons and desert planets that were not visited often. David, Larry, and the Admiral talked to the law enforcement officials about these holes in the wall. They found that these places were basically left alone due to the lack of manpower. However, these spacemen were provided wanted posters, and if such people were found, they could call law enforcement officers to pick up any fugitives as the spacemen captured and detained. To that end, the officers and crew of the 3 ships were encouraged to be deputized. As the Flying did not believe in ritual, the ships' rosters were recorded in the law enforcement offices and designated as auxiliary deputies. The Admiral and 2 captains were not thrilled about this development. Still, as law-abiding citizens of the galaxy, they agreed to the idea of detaining what criminal elements they came across while on their mission. Larry looked at his 2 companions.
I can't help but think we have been handed a huge can of worms.
None of the 3 could have possibly known just how big a can of worms they had been given. It would make the events in and around the wormhole pale in comparison.
The first hole in the wall they would investigate was the moon of the desert planet Flyzinga 2. The 3 ships split up, taking orbit above one sector of the moon. Using their sensors, they carefully mapped the tunnels and other hiding places. David assigned Chief Briggs to take a security detail down to check out the inhabitants of the tunnels. The detained would be tracked and guided by the sensor lab. They were to have personnel shields, unicorders, and lasers set to stun but authorized to use deadly force to safeguard the detail and innocence. The chief took 10 of the biggest and brightest men to search the labyrinth facing them. The sensors did not detect any space vehicle in the area. not above nor below ground. Instead, the detail encountered what seemed like a village, and met with the village leaders. This was not some primitive tribe. The village had the technology to support the inhabitants in a relatively modern, howbeit, simple lifestyle. They found that the village was made up of Fleisings that had just decided to drop out of the more modern society for a simpler existence. When asked about the rest of the tunnel complex, they learned that there were several other villages, just like the first. The chief used his unicorder to scan the village but found no fugitives. Still guided by the sensor lab, the security team investigated the entire tunnel complex, finding only quiet, simple folks who simply wanted to be left alone. The Bradley's sensor team found a ship hidden in a camouflaged bunker, and within the bunker, a steel building. The ship had about 10 life signs, the building another 10. Larry sent Dale and a detail of shielded, armed men, the biggest and brightest crewmen, to investigate. The team teleported just outside the door to the building. Dale checked his unicorder to determine whether the door was locked, then opened the door and quietly stepped into the building. The team used their unicorders to check for any of the fugitives, and lo and behold, all 10 in the building were on the list provided by the law enforcement agency. The fugitives were bound. Then the team went to investigate the ship. The ship was, for all intents and purposes, a prison ship. 10 females in various states of dress or undress were caged in 5 cells. When asked, the prisoners told Dale about their abduction. Dale called Larry.
Captain, we have 10 fugitives and 10 females that had been kept prisoner. These females were used by males daily, not just the 10 males here, but men from someplace else. Their rape was all night long by many, many males.
Larry called the Admiral and told him what he had uncovered. The Admiral called the law enforcement agency and was told that a detail would arrive in 2 days. Larry cautiously freed the females and put them in 5 cabins aboard the Bradley. His chief medical officer checked the females over, finding they had been seriously abused, raped, and starved. The Admiral sent his medical officer to the Bradley to confirm the Bradley's doctor's diagnosis. Along with the medical officer, he sent clothing, food, and female crewmen to stay with the prisoners until the cops arrived. The Confederation used their sensors and found a large building made of native materials and constructed to blend into the scene. The Admiral led a team to investigate the building and discovered a small army of heavily armed soldiers. Upon finding out they had been discovered, a firefight ensued. The Admiral called for the Constitution and the Bradley to send 15 Marines each to join the fight. David and Chief Briggs, with 13 volunteers, teleported to the battleground. Larry and Dale did the same. The Admiral laughed and ordered their forces to charge, and in 20 minutes, the army was subdued, bound, and locked up aboard the Confederation. While the Admiral was waiting for the cops, David decided to circle the moon to see if the 3 might have missed anything. On the dark side of the moon, David found a Krill battle cruiser, wrecked and abandoned. Sensors indicated many bodies aboard and 1 life sign. David assigned Tasha to take a team to investigate the wreck. Tasha found 1 living Krill female officer aboard, pinned under a girder. It took Tasha's whole team to free the officer. Taken to the Constitution, she was seen by the chief medical officer, bandaged, given some painkillers, fed, and encouraged to sleep. The remainder of the crew of the Krill ship was placed in a cryogenic chamber to be delivered to the Krill home world in time. From the remaining officer, David learned that bandits had overpowered the crew, killed the captain, destroyed the ship's controls, set the ship to crash, and teleported off. When asked who had done this, she just cried.
A Krill battle cruiser.
David reported his find to the Admiral, who shouted,
Another atrocity to investigate, untranslatable sounds.
David continued to scan the moon and found nothing else. At about that time, the cops arrived to take custody of the prisoners and to ferry the females home. David called the Krill home world and reported his find, the victim, and the corpses, telling the Krill command that the 3 ships would continue their mission, and when they, the Krill, arrived in the Fleising system to give him a call and he would meet them to turn over what he had and lead them to the crashed ship. The prison ship, steel building, and the building that housed the army were destroyed, and all traces of them obliterated. After a short meeting aboard the Confederation, the 3 ships moved on to the desert world, Fleising 2. Being so much larger than the moon, a different strategy was developed. The search would be from pole to pole, searching 15-degree arches. 3 ships searching 15 degrees each would take in 45 degrees, mapping such targets found to be investigated after the initial scans. Surprisingly enough, only one area on the planet had any suggestion of something hidden. The sensors indicate a massive energy source, technological manufacturing facilities, a spaceport, housing, 1500 life sign, and all hidden hundreds of feet underground. Admiral Yellowtooth led a large team of Marines down to the hidden facility and encountered heavy resistance. During the battle, his son, Red Claw, was injured, which enraged the Admiral.
Marines, take out those people!
The Marines took the resistors out, and the Admiral walked in, giving his Marines the order to stun any living thing they came across. As they marched in, they saw females and children, and the Admiral amended his order to allow non-combatants to go to their quarters. This facility was obviously a covert flying factory, allowing the employees to have their families with them. The Admiral ordered his Marines to search the buildings and find the factory headquarters. Having a Marine lead him to the headquarters, the Admiral and his Marines entered and confronted the factory managers. Surprised, the managers shouted,
"Who the untranslatable are you?"
The Admiral stood straight and proud at the head of his team of Marines.
I am Admiral Yellowtooth. Who are you? What is this place? And why doesn't the Flyzing government know about this place?
One manager fainted, another sat, and the third stood.
This is a Flyzing government facility manufacturing classified material. You, Admiral, are in a heap of trouble.
The Admiral told the standing manager to check his credentials with the Flyzing government. The manager did make the ordered check and then apologized to the Admiral.
Admiral, the President wishes to speak to you.
The Admiral and the President talked, and the President apologized to the Admiral, saying that he did not think that the Admiral would discover the covert factory. Being very blunt, the Admiral answered,
Mr. President, what did you think I would find? I am an admiral with the latest naval equipment available and 2 very powerful Earth Navy ships with me. We will find everything around this star system unless we find Commodore Bluetail and our missing battleship first. Untranslatable, you, untranslatable, and to think I supported your campaign. Never again.
The President apologized to the Admiral and asked him to leave the factory and continue his search. The Admiral asked, in harsh tones,
Are there any other things I might find during my search?
The President replied,
I'll have to get back to you on that one, Admiral.
Another short meeting aboard the Confederation and the 3 ships moved on to Flyzinga 1.
This was an ice world about twice the size of the moon the ships had investigated first. They decided that the strategy they had used to investigate Flyzinga 2 was the best way to search. However, the ice world held no secrets. The next target was the only other planet or moon able to sustain carbon-based life, a world on the other side of the sun from the Flyzing home world. This world had a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, moderate climate, water, vegetation, wildlife, and aquatic creatures available for food, but no civilization had ever been discovered or established. David wondered why such a world had never been colonized. The 3 ships again used the 15-degree scans that had found the government factor to chart the new planet. The Constitution discovered one questionable area, the Bradley found 3 such areas, and the Confederation found 2. But as the ships began a closer, more detailed scan, they found that the planet had a massive tunnel system between the 6 questionable areas. This would require a massive effort to investigate. All 6 areas would have to be invaded simultaneously not to alert others. The Confederation had a Marine force of 100. The Bradley and the Constitution both had a security division of 60. The ship's commanders felt that the Marine and security forces needed to be augmented by volunteers. The Bradley and the Constitution had enough volunteers to augment the security forces to 100. David assigned Chief Briggs and Commander Peel to command a force of 50, 30 security crewmen and 20 volunteers each. Larry divided his forces in much the same way. The sensor labs were to keep tabs on the marine details and search for more information, movements, and energy emissions. Tasha led her team to the first area, having teleported into one of the tunnels close to the hive activity. The first thing they encountered was a creature resembling a 3-foot spider. The spider recoiled from the detachment and began to run toward the open space the detachment had come to investigate. Tasha ordered,
Hold your fire. Let's follow that big fellow and see what is to be discovered, without violence if possible.
The detachment followed the spider to a large open space, only to discover hundreds of spiders peacefully waiting for them. A somewhat larger spider approached the detachment, seeming to question them. In Tasha's mind, she heard,
Who are you? Why are you here?
Tasha approached the larger spider and said,
We are seeking to find criminals from another planet. We detected 6 areas like this one and tunnels connecting these areas, so we came to investigate. Do you know of any creatures unlike yourselves hiding on this planet?
The spider's reply was negative. Then Tasha said,
In that case, we will leave you in peace.
The spider nodded, turned, and all the spiders left the detachment to leave. Upon arriving at the Constitution, Tasha found that all the other teams had experienced the same thing. The admiral and captains met again and decided that Fleising space had been searched. It was time to begin searching the nearest star system.